Book 8. Was it any good? The story. Now, I don't think anybody really needs to keep hearing this, but anybody who's familiar with the game by this point knows that Fire Emblem Heroes writing is nothing but peak and amazing and nothing wrong with it whatsoever. And if you hate it, then, I mean, I guess you're part of the majority because, I mean, a lot of people do not like the writing in this game for good reason. But I will say that Book 8's story, for what it is in fact a story written by people at Intelligent Systems. I guess that's not really an opinion thing, it's just kind of a fact, but this was surprisingly better than all the other books so far, or at least a lot of the recent ones, but whether you think that's a good or bad thing, or that means a lot, that's up to you. I'll at least say that it had a lot of really cool concepts and ideas, and some of the OC designs and overall direction with them was probably some of my favorite in the entire game. Not to mention the actual villain was pretty interesting, and I'm willing to put up with some villains here and there. Like, I don't hate Surtur, I kind of like him, but that's just because he has literally nothing but, oh, my name is Surtur and I killed your sister, ha 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 ha. Sometimes that's kind of appealing, right? But I feel like a lot of the villains otherwise have just been trying to go down this path of, we have this like convoluted reason that never really sticks the landing a lot of the time, or it ends in an unsatisfying way. And while I wouldn't say Tree Dude's thing was perfect, it was definitely a lot more interesting and compelling compared to basically any other villain, I would say, besides Golveg. Golveg, I think at least was handled well enough, but as far as like the actual story went, I mean, it's definitely a lot better than what 7 was going for at least. And really my biggest takeaway from Book 8 was I wish they put more time into writing the story, because the current structure does not really help for telling a really good narrative. And I'm not asking for like a masterpiece narrative, but something that I feel is relatively good for the most part. It's not like the game couldn't have a good story, and it's clear that even from just this book alone, they could come up with interesting ideas and execute them in some good ways. And Forging Bonds, even by itself, just has a lot of good writing for the most part, but I would like to see more future books with better and longer written stories, because I feel like even towards the end of Book 8, it just felt like it was getting rushed out. Like, oh, this character died, next chapter, this character died, next chapter, oh, now we killed the final boss, end of the story, and then that's it. It kind of feels like at times the story starts picking up by the point where it's too late to really go that far into it. Like, once it really starts getting interesting, it just kind of ends. I will say though that between all the 8 books that we have, this is still one of the better ones that we did get, and I'm willing to give credit where it's due. I think they did a better job, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. I would just like to see more of it going forward, but I don't think this is really ever going to be something they improve on until they just fix the overall structure of how they tell their story. Not that I have a particularly amazing solution to it, but there should be something they could do, even if it's just writing more per chapter, just so that there's more to go off of. But it was definitely a better time than most other books, I feel, so I'm willing to give it a pass. It's technically not a banner, but I would give it a thank you for the orbs. I will probably consider reading it again in the future, which is a better score than what I gave Book 7, so good job, IS. You can have a thumbs up image in this current time frame of the video. Congratulations. Next, the new heroes. Now, this might be where the actual hot takes are, assuming the previous segment didn't have any of those, but I think overall, Book 8 has had one of the best new heroes catalogs of any book. And before you go into comments and you're typing up, oh, well, that's because we got Base Indigo. Nope, 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 nope. Shut up, shut up, shut up. I got other points. It's not just that. I promise you it's not really that big of a factor. I would say, as far as all the new hero banners are concerned, right? We got a lot of new units that were basically overdue, or characters that were just waiting to get added in some capacity. We got stuff like the Dawn Brigade, the 3 Houses banner, which added a lot of base versions for characters that people have been waiting for. Same with the Awakening banner. We got actual Thracia units that did interesting stuff. 2 Engage banners, which had a lot of characters people were waiting for. Fates also followed a similar suit to that of like 3 Houses and Awakening, I feel. Nurgle finally getting added. That was something that a lot of people have been waiting for, and I'm gonna talk about Valadar soon, but that was also kind of in the same category as well. Everything else, I think, for the most part, was just either kind of inoffensive or didn't really make me roll my eyes compared to a lot of other banners that we've gotten in the past, especially in Book 7, which had a lot of questionable choices for banners, as well as units getting more than one thing in a given year, which was a bit too much at certain points. And we definitely had some repeats here and there, which I personally don't care for, but that's just kind of a thing that happens in every book anyway. But it was pretty much kept to a minimum for the most part, and I can't say there was really a new heroes banner that made me go, man, that really, really sucks. At minimum, it felt like it was either, oh, I don't really care, but I'm glad these are the units they put in, or it was like, oh, that's pretty hype, super cool that they're finally in, blah, 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 right? I think as far as the new hero banners are concerned, I think it was a very good selection. Even amongst like the instant emotes that weren't really mentioned either because they don't show up on the banner, we still got stuff like Pandreo and other units. I remember Pandreo, but overall, I can't say I'm really upset with the selection of new heroes, especially coming off of Book 7, which I think is still one of the weakest lineups we've ever had, barring Book 2, which was like notoriously bad because it just had a bunch of alt spam with less units each banner, which was like a really weird decision. That would be something you would kind of see this book, but you know, didn't really happen. Now, on the seasonal side, while I definitely have a lot more critiques, I'm willing to throw them a bit more of a bone to this because there are a lot of units that got their first time alts. We got stuff like Petra, Dudu, we had some engaged characters, which I think was perfectly fine as well. We had VIII finally getting in. Now we have every playable Awakening character in the game, which is kind of crazy on its own. Tormod, Thea, Emran, Hrid finally came back for something else, you know? There was definitely a pretty good selection overall, and there were definitely some picks that I probably would have wished they waited on a bit more, especially since they did have repeat units here and there, but I think overall it's been pretty good on both ends. I still think the new heroes was definitely better, but otherwise, as far as these banners are concerned, I think they were pretty good for the most part. I do wish they kept T, and that's going to be something that I never let down because T really was like their second coming of Picnic, and I wish they kept both, but we can't have nice things sometimes. Now, I will say, even if you don't agree with those two, I think the idea of adding emblems into the game and the way they did it was incredible. While the ring effects have definitely had a lot of implications on the state of the game, even beyond just a natural power creep and skill creep, I think the idea of just having these types of things around has opened up so many new ways of using units, and in some cases kind of revitalized a lot of unit types because a lot of them weren't really able to function, whether it was because they couldn't really reliably enter combat, or they didn't have good ways of getting in and out with something like extra movement or Canto, or they just got general buffs with slang or, you know, armored whatever Ike has. It was just a really cool idea to add, and you know, some of them are definitely a bit overpowered for what it is, but I would say that what they brought into the game is a lot better than what we would have had without. I think it is probably one of the most interesting things we've gotten out of VIII in a really, really long time. Although I would at least like to say that I want these banners to stand on their own accord, at least to the extent that they possibly could with power creep and skill creep, because I find that they could be their own separate discussion for the most part, but even so, I think what they added to the game was just an overall net positive, and it is, again, just one of the most interesting things they've done in a really, really long time, which is something that I can only give props to, because despite this game being on 8 years, I was really surprised that there'd be another thing in this game that really get me interested in basically whatever was going on in the game itself. And, you know, it's probably just another excuse to print the same characters, but I think what they're adding on top of it is interesting enough to where I don't really care about it. And I still get why they do it, because they are running out of characters to really sell and do whatever with. So, good job. As far as the legendaries are concerned too, I think it's a fine selection too. They are really running low on legendary options, but I don't think there was really anything here that made me roll my eyes or do anything that I just did not like at all. We got Camilla, male Lear, male Corrin, and male Shez. I think it's perfectly fine. I don't know what they're really going to do for future legendaries, because these are very much some of the last ones they could have possibly done, but I mean, they'll probably pull something out of their butt if they really need to, so you know, I'll give them this much. It's good enough this time around. They get a pass. Now, the one thing that I will absolutely criticize Book 8's banners for are the mythics. The mythics, in my opinion, are probably some of the weakest it's ever been, and I think part of it is probably due to the fact that they introduced a lot of OCs in this book, but even beyond that, there were just some selections that really did not make any sense to me, or if they were going to do, then it didn't really feel great to do it at that point in time. Like, I think Loki is probably the most stand-outish of that, because she kind of disappeared for a long while, and on the 1 month that we probably could have gotten a non-OC mythic that wasn't an alt for a character that was already in the game, we got an OC mythic, and I think that's the one that probably burnt a lot of people the most, myself included. Lumiere herself is not particularly awful, but at the same time, we did also get her Fallen version like 3 months later, which also rubbed me the wrong way as well. I think the OCs probably could just end up taking the legendary slots if they need to, and I think that's probably going to be for the best, personally speaking, because I think there's really no distinction between what IS does and doesn't do with their OCs. If you saw like Atri and a lot of the other non-mythical mythics like Reagan and Oder and stuff, I think they could easily just put them onto legendaries, solve that issue, and then make all the mythics just all the other characters they have lying around, because I think that is the most interesting thing about mythics, is that we get them actually playable. And they're not OCs. Worst case scenario, I think they should always do double mythics and have an OC and a non-OC every single time. But if they don't want to do that, then I don't really know what else they could really do, because right now I think the mythic selections are somehow even weaker than legendaries, and legendaries are basically out of options. So that should pretty much tell you how I feel about the state of mythics. And while we do have one more mythic banner right before Book 8 ends, I'm not really going to hold my breath, because it's most likely going to be the Snake Lady and the Tree Dude, whatever the OC's names were, which I cannot also pronounce. Thank you, IS. Or that's maybe just my issue. But regardless, if it somehow isn't just that, then maybe I'll give it a slight bump, but I have no reason to believe otherwise. And I don't think it really would change much of my opinion of the lineup regardless. I do think it should be a bit better going forward. But overall, in terms of Book 8 banners, I think it's been pretty solid. The free stuff. Now, I think the free stuff also plays a similar role to a lot of the banner stuff, where we got a bunch of characters I think were either overdue or was really cool to see in just a GHB form, because we probably would have never really gotten them otherwise. I think Valadar was definitely one of the most long overdue characters, especially being teased right before the launch of the game. But we still got a lot of other awesome characters like a Lloydal, which I think a lot of people are really excited about, and he's pretty good for Arena at least. We got stuff like Pern and Mavier and Castor and Candace, who was just a recruitable boss. That was pretty cool. I think a lot of people also really liked Panette, and she had a decent PRF. And then we had Marnie, and she's broken for whatever reason, but I mean, that's also free to play. That's really great. And like, the standards for free to play stuff is like super low, so when we get stuff like this, it's really nice. And overall, I can't say I really have any complaints with the selection of characters they chose to put on here. I would say the overall quality was also just pretty good, and probably about on the same level as Book 7, although excluding Marnie because she is very much the outlier, I would say it's about the same amount of quality as Book 7's freebies, you know, relative to its time, which I think is good. It just means we get more options to play around with. Now, the Tempest Trial stuff I think was also perfectly fine too. There are some units I probably didn't care about here and there, and that partially was probably due to the timing of their release, but otherwise we still got alts for characters that never got alts before, which I think is always just a really nice thing to see. The only stuff I don't really care about, and this is less on the character getting the alt and more of just how IS designs units at times, is stuff like Nils and Yarn, where they end up getting another version, but it's basically a copy-paste version of their previous self, and it's like slightly better or basically the same in Nils' case. And this is kind of the only thing I have a criticism with, less on the actual choice itself. I wish they were just different, a bit more different, which IS doesn't really like to do when a character has one defining trait, and it does get kind of annoying at times, but otherwise I think the general selection was pretty good. And we did also get some really nice seals like Finish seals and Clash and Tempo, which even the best kind of Tempo too. Speed Defense is like a really good one to start out with. And Beast Seal, while definitely still not amazing, is still a pretty solid seal in its own right. And the most I could really say is that none of these are bad by any means. They may not be like strong, at least on some of the GHB levels, but overall, I mean, I did like a lot of the choices, and hopefully into Book 9, we just get a lot of really good GHBs and a lot of good Tempest Trial units. And hopefully the seals also pick up the slack too, because we do not need rouse. Thank you very much. Miscellaneous stuff that I couldn't fit into the other categories. We had good updates, bad updates, and game modes, I guess. Let's start with the good updates, because these are definitely pretty noteworthy for the most part. The Inheritance update from 4 to 5 was a great thing they did, and we do have some issues here and there when it comes to like echo skills now costing a slot, and them introducing a lot more skills that start out at their tier 4 version. But going from 4 to 5 is still such a great thing, and I'm glad they did that. The effects tab that now shows us how many statuses a unit may have, which is an incredibly great update. That on top of the display keywords function that now gets rid of a lot of the bloat in the game, which a lot of us have been asking for a very long time, and I'm so glad they did that. That on top of the fact that they're now spacing out weapon and skill description, so it's actually a lot more readable. Granted, everything still has 10 paragraphs in it, but it's definitely a lot easier to digest now more than ever. So I'm so glad they did that stuff. We now get additional weekly revival banners each Sunday, which is really great, and they have sparks on them now, which I'm pretty sure are free to play, which is really, really great. I think it's just more additional stuff if you want to keep up with your favorites, which at this point in the game, you may as well try to. We got the engage edit menu thing, although this is more of like a weird thing to me because I feel like eventually they're going to make it so you don't have to go into your skill set to do it, but it's still a nice convenience nonetheless. Aided heroes, which I did want to mention because every year we end up getting some type of gimmick that ends up making a lot of differences for a bunch of units, but this time around it feels so inconsequential that I can't help but put it in the good update because it's just something that you want if you just want something cute and nothing really worrying about power creep, which was, you know, kind of similar to that of attuned skills. And then we also had like the rearms and attuned update themselves, which makes it so every rearmed and attuned can equip any type of rearmed and echo skill. And I think overall those are pretty good updates. We had some bad updates though. I mean, I would say 1.5, because one of them we ended up screaming at the top of our lungs for them to not do. The first one being the heroic update they had, where now you have to merge any sort of legendary mythic emblem that's by a certain version and you could get a bunch of flowers, which doesn't really address the flower issues that we do have. It definitely felt like a cheap way to get more value out of these types of units. Even when they started doing stuff like High Dragon Wall, which scores way more than any other B slot for no reason, it just felt like a really weird decision when I feel like flowers should not be stingy. They're not going to make any unit from Gen 1 or Gen 2 on the same level as anything that just released, so there's really no reason for them to be as difficult to obtain as they are. And the only other one I want to mention, because this is 100% going in the video, the arena change they almost tried and pulled until we all just kind of told them not to do that, and they didn't do that, which is great. And now we have 2 legendary bonuses every so often, which is pretty nice. I do like that we now have the actual 10 latest legendary thing to keep bonuses a lot more proactive, but we do have the other thing now that makes it so your older legendaries actually work like legendary units. So a lesson be learned with that: if IS ever tries to pull a stunt like that that goes basically against the entire player base, let's make sure to call them out on that, because they'll definitely listen. And then as for the game modes, I mean what is there to say about the game modes, quote unquote? Game, quote unquote. Mode, quote unquote. Auto affinity battles, which they debuted with, and it is probably one of the worst modes I've ever played, because it is basically the equivalent of frontline phalanx, but you have to sit through an unskippable battle, which is really tiring and doesn't really do anything besides waste your time and keep you in the game, because I think that's what they're trying to do. It's a really bad mode, and I wish they never did that. Meanwhile, we did get United Warfront, which I think was actually pretty fun. I wish it was a bit longer, but overall the mode is pretty good, and they added an extended abyssal difficulty if you felt the difficulty was not really up to par. And then we got Loki Light, which is basically Loki with worse rewards, so yeah, that sucks. And I think that's about it for Book 8, unless you want to count the Braves, but I've already given my takes on them, so I don't feel like I have to repeat myself there. Overall, I think Book 8 has been pretty good for the most part. It felt like a nice step up from Book 7, and one of the things I always look forward to when it comes to every single book is what characters they add to the game. And as far as Book 8 was concerned, I think it is only behind Book 4 and 5. I don't really have an order between those two, but I think those 2 books are probably the best we've gotten in FE. I would say Book 8 did a remarkable job despite its restrictions of having units guarantee an alt and blah blah just for padding. They did a good job. Now, as far as what I said last year when it came to Book 7, there are concerns I still have with the game as is, but I'm hoping throughout the course of Book 8 that they'll try and improve upon the game in a lot of ways that makes the player base a lot less apathetic to the game overall. Or who knows, maybe they'll run it into the ground even more. I don't know if I want to comment on that, but maybe I could hope for Book 9 to pick up the slack on that, because you definitely want people to enjoy the game.